So when we come to worldview, we've already spoken about worldview. Devdutt Patnaik's video I would like to share.
To understand the business of mythology and what a chief belief officer is supposed to do, you have to hear a story of Ganesha, the elephant-headed god who is the scribe of storytellers, and his brother, the athletic warlord of the gods, Kartikeya. The two brothers one day decided to go on a race 3 times around the world. Kartikeya leapt on his peacock and flew around the continents and the mountains and the oceans. He went around once, he went around twice, he went around thrice. But his brother, Ganesha, simply walked around his parents once, twice, thrice, and said, I won. How come? Said Kartikeya. And Ganesha said, you went around the world. I went around my world. What matters more? If you understand the difference between the world and my world, you understand the difference between logos and mythos. The world is objective, logical, universal, factual, scientific. My world is subjective. It's emotional. It's personal. It's perceptions, thoughts, feelings, dreams. It is the belief system that we carry. It's the myth that we live in. The world tells us how the world functions, how the sun rises, how we are born. My world tells us why the sun rises. Why were we born? Every culture is trying to understand itself. Why do we exist? And every culture comes up with its own understanding of life, its own customized version of mythology. Culture is a reaction to nature. And this understanding of our ancestors is transmitted generation from generation in the form of stories, symbols, and rituals, which are always indifferent to rationality. And so when you study it, you realize that different people of the world have a different understanding of the world. Different people see things differently, different viewpoints. There is my world and there is your world. And my world is always better than your world. Because my world, you see, is rational, and yours is superstition. Yours is faith. Yours is illogical. This is the root of the clash of civilizations. It took place once in 326 BC on the banks of a river called the Indus, now in Pakistan. This river lends itself to India's name, India, Indus. Alexander, a young Macedonian, met there what he called a gymnosophist, which means the naked wise man. We don't know who he was. Perhaps he was a Jain monk, like Bahubali over here, the Gomateshwara Bahubali, whose image is not far from Mysore. Or perhaps he was just a yogi who was sitting on a rock, staring at the sky and the sun and the moon. Alexander asked, what are you doing? And the gymnosophist answered, I'm experiencing nothingness. Then the gymnosophist asked, what are you doing? And Alexander said, I am conquering the world. And they both laughed. Each one thought the other was a fool. Gymnosophist said, why is he conquering the world? It's pointless. And Alexander thought, why is he sitting around doing nothing? What a waste of a life. To understand this difference in viewpoints, we have to understand the subjective truth of Alexander, his myth, and the mythology which constructed it. Alexander's mother, his parents, his teacher, Aristotle, told him the story of Homer's Iliad. They told him of a great hero called Achilles, who, when participated in battle, victory was assured. But when he withdrew from the battle, defeat was inevitable. Achilles was a man who could shape history, a man of destiny. And this is what you should be, Alexander. That's what he heard. What should you not be? You should not be Sisyphus, who rolls a rock up the mountain all day only to find the boulder roll down at night. Don't live a life which is monotonous, mediocre, meaningless. Be spectacular, like the Greek heroes, like Jason, who went across the sea with the Argonauts and fetched the golden fleece. Be spectacular, like Theseus, who entered the labyrinth and killed the bull-headed Minotaur. When you play in a race, win. Because when you win, the exhilaration of victory is the closest you will come to the ambrosia of the gods. Because you see, the Greeks believed you live only once. And when you die, you have to cross the river Styx. And if you have lived an extraordinary life, you will be welcomed to Elysium, or what the French call Champs-Élysées. The heaven of the heroes. But these are not the stories that the gymnosophist heard. He heard a very different story. He heard of a man called Bharat, after whom India is called Bharata. Bharat also conquered the world. And then he went to the topmost peak of the greatest mountain in the center of the world called Meru. And he wanted to hoist his flag to say, I was here first. But when he reached the mountain peak, he found the peak covered with countless flags of world conquerors before him, each one claiming, I was here first. That's what I thought until I came here. And suddenly, in this canvas of infinity, Bharat felt insignificant. This was the mythology of the gymnosophist. You see, he had heroes like Ram, Raghupati Ram, and Krishna, Govinda, Hari. But they were not two characters on two different adventures. They were two lifetimes of the same hero. When Ramayana ends, the Mahabharata begins. When Ram dies, Krishna is born. When Krishna dies, eventually he will be back as Ram. You see, the Indians also had a river which separates the land of the living from the land of the dead. But you don't cross it once. You go to and fro endlessly. It was called the Vaitarni. You go again and again and again, because you see, nothing lasts forever in India, not even death. And so you have these grand rituals where great images of mother goddesses are built and worshipped for 10 days. And what do you do at the end of 10 days? You dunk it in the river. Because it has to end. And next year, she will come back. What goes around always comes around. And this rule applies not just to man, but also the gods. You see, the gods have to come back again and again and again as Ram, as Krishna. Not only do they live infinite lives, but the same life is lived infinite times till you get the point of it all. Groundhog's Day. Two different mythologies. Which is right? Two different mythologies, two different ways of looking at the world. One linear, one cyclical. One believes this is the one and only life. The other believes this is one of many lives. And so the denominator of Alexander's life was one. So the value of his life was the sum total of achievements. The denominator of the gymnosophist's life was infinity. So no matter what he did, it was always zero. And I believe it is this mythological paradigm that inspired Indian mathematicians to discover the number zero. Who knows? And that brings us to the mythology of business. If Alexander's belief influenced his behavior, if the gymnosophist's belief influenced his behavior, then it was bound to influence the business they were in. You see, what is business but the result of how the market behaves, and how the organization behaves. And if you look at cultures around the world, all you have to do is understand their mythology, and you will see how they behave and how they do business. Take a look. If you live only once in one-life cultures around the world, you will see an obsession with binary logic, absolute truth, standardization, absoluteness, linear patterns in design. But if you look at cultures which are cyclical and based on infinite lives, you will see a comfort with fuzzy logic, with opinion, with contextual thinking, with everything is relative, sort of, mostly. You look at art, look at the ballerina, how linear she is in her performance. And then look at the Indian classical dancer, the Kuchipudi dancer, the Bharatanatyam dancer, curvaceous. And then look at business. Standard business model, vision, mission, values, processes. Sounds very much like the journey through the wilderness to the promised land, with the commandments held by the leader, and if you comply, you will go to heaven. But in India, there is no the promised land. There are many promised lands. Depending on your station in society, depending on your stage of life. You see, businesses are not run as institutions by the idiosyncrasies of individuals. It's always about taste. It's always about my taste. You see, Indian music, for example, does not have the concept of harmony. There is no orchestra conductor. There is one performer standing there and everybody follows. And you can never replicate their performance twice. It is not about documentation and contract, it's about conversation and faith. It's not about compliance, it's about setting. Getting the job done by bending or breaking the rules. Just look at your Indian people around here, you'll see them smile. They know what it is. And then look at people who have done business in India, you'll see the exasperation on their faces. You see, this is what India is today. The ground reality is based on a cyclical worldview. So it's rapidly changing, highly diverse, chaotic, ambiguous, unpredictable. And people are okay with it. And then globalization is taking place. The demands of modern institutional thinking is coming in, which is rooted in one-life culture. And clash is going to take place, like on the banks of the Indus. It is bound to happen. I have personally experienced it. I'm trained as a medical doctor. I did not want to study surgery. Don't ask me why. I love mythology too much. I want to learn mythology, but there's nowhere you can study, so I have to teach it myself. And mythology does not pay, well, until now. So I had to take up a job, and I worked in the pharma industry. And I worked in the healthcare industry. And I worked as a marketing guy, and a sales guy, and a knowledge guy, and a content guy, and a training guy. I even was a business consultant doing strategies and tactics. And I would see the exasperation between my American and European colleagues when they were dealing with India. Example, please tell us the process to invoice hospitals. Step A, step B, step C, mostly. How do you parameterize mostly? How do you put it in a nice little software? You can't. I would give my viewpoints to people, but nobody was interested in listening to it. You see, until I met Kishore Biyani of the Future Group, you see, he has established the largest retail chain called Big Bazaar, and there are more than 200 formats across 50 cities and towns of India. And he was dealing with diverse and dynamic markets, and he knew very intuitively that best practices developed in Japan and China and Europe and America will not work in India. He knew that institutional thinking doesn't work in India, individual thinking. He had an intuitive understanding of the mythic structure of India. So he asked me to be the chief belief officer and said, all I want you to do is align belief. Sounds so simple, but belief is not measurable. You can't measure it, you can't manage it. So how do you construct belief? How do you enhance the sensitivity of people to Indianness? Even if you're Indian, it is not very explicit, it's not very obvious. So I try to work on the standard model of culture, which is develop stories, symbols, and rituals. And I will share one of the rituals with you. You see, it is based on the Hindu ritual of darshan. Hindus don't have the concept of commandments, so there's nothing right or wrong in what you do in life. So you're not really sure how you stand in front of God. So when you go to the temple, all you seek is an audience with God. You want to see God, and you want God to see you, and hence the gods have very large eyes, large unblinking eyes, sometimes made of silver. So they look at you because you don't know whether you're right or wrong, and so all you seek is divine empathy. Just know where I came from, why I did the jugaad, why did I do the setting, why I don't care for the processes. Just understand me, please. And based on this, we created a ritual for leaders. After the leader completes his training and is about to take over the store, we blindfold him. We surround him with the stakeholders, the customer, his family, his team, his boss. You read out his KRA, KPI, you give him the keys, and then you remove the blindfold. And invariably, you see a tear because the penny has dropped. He realizes that to succeed, he does not have to be a professional. He does not have to cut out his emotions. He has to include all these people in his world to succeed, to make them happy, to make the boss happy, to make everyone happy, the customers happy, because the customer is God. That sensitivity is what we need. Once this belief enters, behavior will happen, business will happen, and it has. So then we come back to Alexander and to the gymnosophist, and everybody asks me, which is the better way? This way or that way? And it's a very dangerous question because it leads you to the path of fundamentalism and violence. So I will not answer the question. What I will give you is an Indian answer, the Indian head shake. Depending on the context, depending on the outcome, choose your paradigm. You see, because both the paradigms are human constructions. They're cultural creations, not natural phenomena. And so the next time you meet someone, a stranger, one request. Understand that you live in the subjective truth, and so does he. Understand it. And when you understand it, you will discover something spectacular. You will discover that within infinite myths lies the eternal truth. Who sees it all? Varuna has but 1,000 eyes, Indra 100, you and I, only 2. Thank you.
Well, he actually, in a way, conveyed the fact that everyone has their own set of reality in their mind.
Yes.
So there is very less objective and factual things that is common to people, especially in a conflict or whatever the context is. But we do have our own version of world, our own version of belief systems. And even in any conflict or in any interaction, people operate from different places. And they have different perspectives to see the same situation.
Yes, yes.
With empathy, we can at least understand where the other guy is operating from. And then enter an accommodative or a collaborative mindset to deal with the situation. Because in here, competitive approach or avoidance approach makes no sense. It's like competing apples and oranges. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
Okay,
Thanks, Karan. That's very well said.
I would suggest the accommodating mindset, because what he told actually is similar to what Harari, you all know Harari wrote in his book Sapiens also, that there are some universal laws in nature like radioactivity, gravity and other things which you can't deny, and they are the truth. But lot of myths and beliefs were created in the mind of humans to explain the world around them and to create systems for better harmony. So gods, myths, beliefs, cultures came out from them. Creation of nation states, like someone drew a border in 1947 and we became Indians. Okay? So it was a myth. It was like a myth created to unify people.
Right.
So what the problem which occurs is, every culture, every belief is unique. The problem occurs when, from accepting that everyone is unique, someone wants to say, my culture is supreme.
Correct.
Everyone is unique in some way or the other. An Italian is unique from a French guy. A French guy is unique from an American guy. That's fine. But when you say that I am supreme, trouble starts to brew up.
Correct.
So when we accommodate that these are all figments that humans have created to live the world in a better way, and not putting superiority of one over the other.
Very true. Very true.
So I think is a way of doing it.
Yeah, I think moving from mere tolerance of differences or unique tolerance of differences, we move to an understanding that differences exist, and then we move on to appreciating. And now the norm is the ideal is celebrating differences. So moving from just being tolerant to accepting to understanding to now celebrating differences. So I don't know if you remember my book suggestion, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Anybody has read that book? Do you want to resolve a conflict? You've written down, no, something? Because the 72 bold font of I actually is a major deterrent to resolving any conflict. The 72 bold font I is again a major deterrent to any relationship in a sense. So this book is, I mean, Ryan Holiday books are really awesome. One is Ego is the Enemy. The other book that I'm reading right now is Stillness Speaks. A lot of examples that he has given. Karan, you mentioned about empathy. What is the prerequisite or the preliminary 0th step to enhance empathy? We have heard about this term so much. Design thinking starts and ends with empathy. So many things about empathy. But can you build empathy? I think everybody will say, yes, you can build empathy. But people will be more interested to know, how do you build empathy?
The step 0, if I'm not wrong, the step 0 may be starting with becoming aware of our own emotions. What do we think? What are our feels? What are our inner reactions? Once we learn to become aware of that, how things work in the intricacies of mind, then slowly we can relate to what that other guy might feel. And then, like, next, after a few steps, we can, extrapolate it to that. But to build on that, the base we should build is becoming in connection with our own self.
Definitely.
Knowing what we feel.
Yes. Self is...
I think I agree with Karan, because I used to think that putting yourself in other person's shoes is the
Shivani,
0th step.
Tell me.
Yes. I used to think that the 0th step would be to put yourself in the other person's shoes. But if I am not aware of my own reaction to circumstances, my own, I don't know, feelings or emotions, then it's very difficult to put yourself in other person's shoes. Like, it won't come easily otherwise if you're not aware of how you feel or how you react.
Definitely.
If we don't know how it feels in our own shoes, how can we feel how it feels in other shoes?
Exactly. So understanding our own intention, our own thought process, feelings, how has a belief system formed in my head. So I think self-awareness is definitely key. But I would say the 0th step is reducing this font size, because only then I know that the other person exists, because all that I can see is my own point of view, what I prefer, so everything is according to me. So only if I reduce that font size of I? Can I even realize that, okay, somebody else exists and they may have a different set of understanding?
In short, we have to reduce the seeking mindset.
Hey, now everybody should clap now. Dissolving ego. Yes, Sajid, correct. Okay, so one more thing that I wanted to share with you is how do we have a difficult conversation? A difficult conversation could be communicating to the other person, hey, you better do your part, don't free ride. Or a difficult conversation could be to ask for something or to provide slightly negative feedback about somebody's performance. These are some difficult conversations. And I'm going to share a book. I'm going to share a summary of the book. Difficult Conversations by Bruce Patton, Douglas Stone, and Heem, where they say there are 3 sets or stages of conversation. The first is to understand ourselves. So as you rightly pointed out, understanding what's happening. So this is as is, understanding a situation as is, by not bringing in our own imagination, our own fillers, our own creativity and masala into it, trying to make it as factual and understanding as possible. The second stage is to understand intention. And the third stage is to integrate both points of view. So this is also a very interesting book that you could read. So quickly, if you can go through the table. So can you tell me what this point, don't think of identity as a dichotomy. Instead, get clarity on the complexity of identity by using and. Can you explain this point, please? So you may have written down few conflicting scenarios. I had asked you to, what do you want to work on from this session? What do you want to work on? Can you relate to that scenario using any of these points, is what I'm saying. Can you solve that using any of these points?
Can you explain more about fifth point?
Which one?
Fifth point, like dichotomy.
So sometimes, so we should understand what our red flags are. No? Remember, we have spoken about red flags. A trigger. Red flags are triggers. For example, my trigger is when people say, Viji, you're always. Red flag. That word always really bothers me. So that's a trigger for me. Immediately I get worked up and I react. I've understood that. So you may have some red flags for yourself. You have some triggers. Bringing in awareness to that helps. And so thinking of identity as a dichotomy. For example, if somebody attacks my work commitment, I think it as a dichotomy. Either Viji has a work commitment or not. Instead of thinking of my identity as a dichotomy, what I do is my identity is a complex set. My identity is a complex set. It contains a lot of things that makes up my identity. Just by you saying that I lack work ethic, it doesn't affect my identity. So I start using and. Okay, so you have said something about my work ethic, and that is fine from your point of view. From my point of view, this is how I work. So are you getting it?
Could you also explain the second last point that says reframe what they said back into the 3 conversations?
Ma'am, is it like using and instead of?
One second. Parth, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So the 3 conversations in the difficult conversations book is these. So as I said, as is, no, descriptive, what has happened. If we take Amartya's example, there was a task to be done. The, the roles have been assigned. So it is as factual as possible with very less blame game, with very less of your own perceptions or fillers or masala, spice added to it. Okay. So this is the what happened conversation. Where you are very clear about intention, you're very clear that each party contributes and it's not a blame game. It's not a blame game. The second part of the conversation is the feelings conversation. What am I feeling in this? I feel belittled. So for example, sorry, Amartya, I'm taking this example. So the 4 of you may have felt, hey, we have assigned it very clearly. Why didn't you tell us before that you have not done this work? You're now jeopardizing the entire group work. We feel very upset about it. We feel let down about it. What are my strong emotions? And an important gyan for another lesson is never express before you're clear about what the strong feelings are. Because once you communicate, you can't take it back.
Yes, ma'am.
So please refrain, restrain. So that's the word. Press the pause button. How you view or perceive a situation defines how you act on it. Restrain is very important. Unless and until you're very clear about what your emotions are, what your feelings are, and you clarify it within yourself, do not express it.
Okay.
Because when the amygdala is hijacked, what happens, we know. We may say things we don't have even memory of. We can't recall. We have just said it at our extreme emotional self. And then taking it back is really difficult. So that's the feeling, second part of it. And the third is what I mentioned about identity conversation. The authors argue that people need to stop viewing their identity as dichotomous. Instead, we use the word and. For example, I am a good person and I have done bad things, that's fine. And I'm working on forgiving myself. I'm still worthy of love despite it. So therefore, getting your identity attacked during difficult conversations is inevitable. But if you have a dichotomous view of your identity, what happens is it immediately hits you. You don't have a shield. You're not insulated well enough. But if you think that identity is more complex than dichotomous, it will not hit you directly. So even if somebody says something very nasty and derogatory, it doesn't change the way you see yourself. We see Twitter, no? There is somebody saying something and the entire family, the 5 generations of family, everybody is brought into it. Now, if I let everything affect me, then I will go mad. No? So what you say or feel about me doesn't affect my identity. So because I feel identity is more complex. Can you look into what you have written in terms of what you want to restore or repair? Do you think you can do something about it? So let me quickly summarize. Number 1, tolerating differences to accepting to appreciating to now celebrating differences. That is the norm. So the more diverse, the better solutions that we can come up. Unless it's an emergency solution, then too much of diversity is a pain. So when there is diversity, the differences exist, and differences can be in terms of personality, in terms of working style. Somebody works at the last moment, somebody works gradually. So many of you who have done teamwork with German students, exchange students, you will understand. German students always come and crib to me. Vijay, can I not have Indian students in my team? Till the last moment, no clue about whether they don't even know about the presentation. 10 minutes before the presentation, they quickly go through the slides and they present awesome. They present amazingly well. We have done all the work and everybody gets equal marks. That's not fair. So it could be a working style difference. It could be personality, but deep down, if it's a value-based difference, then it's a difficult thing to resolve. You need some more effort into it. When we reduce this eye size, bold 72 bold font, we can start becoming more empathetic. We can understand that everybody has their own worldview and it's a subjective reality for them. Just like I have a subjective reality, the other person also has. So let me try to understand where the person is coming from. So every time I'm challenging my mental model and my worldview, okay, I like this particular group of people, but am I blinded by them? So in Tamil Nadu, we have Tala and Talabadi fans. No? So in Twitter, it's always a war between Vijay Tala fans and Tala Ajit fans and Talabadi fans. In Andhra, you may have who in Andhra?
Pawan Kalyan.
Pawan Kalyan.
And any person. We always have.
Who else? Huh? Do you have armies?
Yeah.
So it's always fighting between the two groups. Those two people have no clue about why they are fighting, but we are so blinded by our obsession about that person or the celebrity that we go mad. So can I challenge my mental model, my prejudices, strong prejudices that I have about people? Can I constantly challenge? Can I constantly purify my filter? How I'm looking at, because the first bias can happen at the bottommost level in ladder of inference, which is how you take in, what do you see? So if you wear a yellow color glass, you will see everything. You think everybody has jaundice. So challenge mental models. Don't be imaginative. Restrain. Do not communicate immediately what you want to say. Work and then communicate, because non-violent communication, we did learn about non-violent communication. And moving from reframing from a blame scenario to a contribution. Both are contributing to this misunderstanding. So let us see how we can resolve. It's not a blame game. And avoidance as a mechanism is not very healthy, because we may feel bad. No? There are a lot of negative outcomes that we may think we can avoid, like unpleasantness. But is it actual avoiding unpleasantness? Or it's not a sustainable model. When certain things can become too personal, take a witness angle, step back. That's the third person angle that you can take. So these are certain things that I wanted to share. Now, please go into what you have written. What do you think Hart's perception or understanding of Bing is, and vice versa?
I think like they're having too much of negativity. I mean, they didn't communicate properly. I think there is a communication gap between them, and they are trying. They see one another as a good person, and they are trying to blame it on their personal relationships. Like this Bing guy tells that Hart has some issues domestically, and the same happens with Bing. I mean, yeah, they say that since marriage he is having some problems, and so they're trying to blame it on their personal lives because they don't want to blame it on the other guy.
Okay.
So that is my observation.
Okay, Amartya. Anybody else pending? So just read the case and try to understand what the issue is, how each person looks or perceives or understands the other person. There are so many assumptions that each person has about the other, which is so not true. And I think that's the starting point of the misunderstanding. Anything from the session or from outside the session that can help you solve the or resolve, if you want to resolve the conflict? Amartya said, Amartya said he will contact that person. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that communication gap should be reduced, ma'am.
Yeah, and one of the points in the course outline, which Paulomi also has practiced a lot, is taking the role of a mentor and uplifting the other person. So Amartya, you can take that role right now.
Like you told, we can forgive others or something like uplift others. So does it mean we have to forgive anyone if he done some genuine mistake? Like, so in a way, can we say like we can excuse every prisoner or everyone who is doing crime? And one more question I have is about that story. Like every people will behave in a way what he's hearing from his childhood and what he knows, like that story of that Alexander and that person. So now suppose take some terrorist or somebody like that. So they are with that mindset from. Am I audible?
Yes.
So those persons are with the mindset from their childhood or something like that. So in their point of view, it's not wrong. So now, as we know this ideology, should we believe that it's their ideology? So what they're doing is correct. In my ideology, it's wrong. But it doesn't work that way, right? So what to do in this kind of this kind of situation?
So you brought in a very, very important concept, forgiveness.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to end today's session with that concept, with that idea of forgiveness. Thanks for preempting. Professor Shiva, sir, do you want to say anything?
No, you have covered everything, so fine.
No, on forgiveness. So Ram's question was, do we forgive always?
Ma'am, I feel that we should use something sort of like forgive, but don't forget type of thing. But like some instances, it's something that you never forget in your life. And that's just like you try a lot, but then also you can't recover that thing. So I don't know on this stand, but it's like forgiving is always not easy.
Yeah. Forgiving is very difficult.
Like people often say forgive and forget, but it's not easy. Forgive and you can't forget. It's a sort of that.
See, forgiving is self-oriented. It is about you, how it affects you. So in that sense, forgiving is about how much you're affected by that incident or any of those matters that disturb you. Forgiving gives you that way forward.
Beautiful. Very, very nicely said. Forgiving gives you the way forward. I mean, it really truly liberates. If some of you can restore or repair or say or apologize for something that you may have done after the session, I mean, that is what we get out of this session. I think forgiveness can really do oneself a lot of good. I think we can feel definitely lighter, more liberated, I would say.
There's a saying, forgive not because the other guy deserves it, but because you deserve peace. And it actually brings a lot of peace.
Ooh, Karan, where is the clap icon? Where is the clap? Awesome.
Reaction.
A reaction. Super. I love that.
And the Gandhian perspective on it is hate the sin, not the sinner.
Correct, correct.
Yes.
And on the justice part, an eye for eye makes the whole world blind. So, so instead of giving it back equally, if he takes an eye, it's not that you should also take an eye. It will end up making the whole world blind.
Very true, very true.
So you can hate the sin, but not the sinner.
Yeah,
But that doesn't prevent someone to understand other people. So, sometimes what happens is things repeat.
Yes.
So in that sense, perhaps one has to also understand forgiving or not is your own decision.
Correct.
But it also provides for understanding both yourself and the other.
Right, right. So we are not going to touch upon deeper issues. For example, in another course of mine, we do a very intense process on forgiveness, and I'm not saying there may be some really very deep issues that have happened, for which requires a lot of processes, a lot of work inside. But petty things, small things. Again, that depends on, it's subjective. Small, petty, it's all subjective actually. But if you think about it, letting go and just forgiving the other person can really do yourself a lot of good, like Karan rightly mentioned. And why hold on to something? You're only adding on to the baggage and feeling more heavy. It's a tough topic. We are not prescribing anything for anybody. We're not saying go immediately forgive. As Sir rightly pointed out, it's your decision. It's your decision, and it requires a lot of thinking.
Conflict management, right?
Huh? What?
It is an important part of conflict management, right?
What management?
Conflict management.
Correct. But what I'm saying is, as Professor Shiva said, it's a decision that you have to take. And certain things may be too deeper and strong issues that some people may have that cannot be forgiven easily. But think about it is what we are saying.
And mind you, forgiving and forgetting are two different aspects. Forgiving is different, forgetting is different.
Ironically, forgiveness is not at all about the other person.
Yes and no. We'll discuss that.
Okay.
Because by you forgiving Karan, you can actually release a lot of negativity in the other person as well. So it is also to the other person.
Indirectly, yeah.
Even directly, if so, you may release a very important emotion called guilt from the other person. No, Karan?
Yes, actually, like if we keep on imbibing the guilt because we haven't forgiven them, it cannot work. But I have observed, once we forgive, it actually starts working constructively from both the sides.
Yes, that is definite. That is definite. Follow me. One more thing about forgetting is forgive, not forget. Why? I mean, ask yourself: is there a reason that is holding space in your mind? You don't want to forget. No, you want to hold on and not let go. Erase that.
I feel
is
that
the space that memory is occupying, is it needed? Some people will not forget because the learning from that experience is very important for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
They want to hold on to the insights or learnings they have got out of an experience. Then that is a more constructive. the space that it occupies in your mind is worth remembering.
What also I've observed, like in my experiences, is apology comes after we forgive. That has happened with me many times.
Hey, thoda mic ke paas aa jao, Karan.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
In my experience, what I've observed is we don't forgive, and then we don't even get a proper apology. But once we release it from our side and we stop holding it against the person, apology starts coming after we forgive. That's what I have observed in my experience.
Beautiful. If anybody, thanks Karan, very beautifully said. If anybody wants to specifically work on this, you know my WhatsApp number. I'm available.